said this to me, and it was wisdom. They said, "Look, it takes two people to get married. It takes one to get a divorce, right? It takes one person to decide they want out. That's it, okay?" And another person who I have so much respect and love for said, before I got married, they said, "Marriage is easy to get into and hard to get out of." And I thought, I didn't understand it. I'd never been married before. This person had been married before and was just trying to say, it's easy to get into, it's hard to get out of. And when I sit here today, I can tell you that divorce was the most challenging life experience that I have ever had. And I have lost my father at 14 years old. And divorce trumps losing my dad at 14 years old.
What's up, fam? Welcome to another edition of God Dreamers. I hope you are well and all is good. So today, I'm really excited because this has been a long haul in the making.
Yeah.
And my brother right here, he knows. So we've been trying to get together, I don't know how long, but finally, by the grace of God, we're able to coordinate our time and place to be able to do this interview. So on today's uh, edition of God Dreamers, I have something that's really special that we're going to cover. Something that it's when you look around and see there are a lot of people that are dealing with this, and that is divorce. And my guest here today has experienced that, unfortunately. But the good news is that he was able to, with the grace of God and the proper support, and he was able to be able to pull it all together and share his experience. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to rebuild from divorce and from a man's perspective. Because a lot of times, we hear about divorce, and typically, and I'm not pointing any fingers, but typically we hear more on the side of the female, right? But today I just wanted to slow down a little bit and really hear from the male's perspective, because, a lot of men go through divorce and it's tough on us as well. So I'm excited about what we're going to hear next. So without further ado, welcome my special guest, Dr. Carey. And I'm going to let him dive into it. I got a couple of questions for you. But anyway, before we get into that, man, thank you so much for being on God Dreamers, my brother.
Yes, sir. Todd, let me just say, man, just awesome to be with you for so many years. And it's been a lot of years that we've known each other. You've helped me in various ways, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I know that we've tried to get this conversation for some time, but as the book of Ecclesiastes says, for everything, there is a time, an appropriate time. And I believe this is the appropriate time. And so I'm happy to be here with you today, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure, man. I'm really excited about what you have to share. As I mentioned before, we hear about divorce, and I want to share a couple of statistics about divorce, because before when we were planning this out, I was kind of curious about what's going, what is the statistics of divorce right now. So I have a couple of points here that I thought were actually quite fascinating. So I'm going to go over them real quickly. So first point is, in the U.S., and this is just in the U.S., around 41% of first marriages are projected to end in divorce. Sounds like, wow. And then it says in 2025, statistics indicate women are more likely to initiate a divorce, with estimates suggesting they file for divorce in roughly 66 to 70% of the cases. When I saw that number, I was like, that's crazy.
Done your homework. You've done your
I was
homework.
like, wow. And then the other statistic, which one, this one makes sense to me. It says the marriage rate has decreased with fewer people getting married overall. And I can see that, especially in this younger generation, that people are opting out from getting married and just either shacking up or just staying single. So I can see that right now. And then they said right here, the age of marriage is those who marry in their mid-20s and to early 30s tend to have the lowest risk of divorce. I thought that was a pretty interesting statistic. So the younger you get married, the lower the chances of you getting divorced. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is
And
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Because in the past, there have been some statistics, for very early marriages. And I'm talking about people get married in their early 20s, and it would make sense, right?
yeah,
They're figuring out who they are, and so they may be more susceptible. But certainly, as people get to their mid 20s and that sort of thing, they have more of a chance. And then people get married later in life and they have their own lives and they built something, they're probably more susceptible to divorce because they kind of have been there, done that, and really built a life of their own. And so it's probably easier for them to walk away. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've done your homework very well. And these statistics are very real. And in fact, I thank you for that acknowledgement that approximately 70% of divorces are filed by women, and for various reasons. And so that is something that I key in on because that means that men are likely to be filed for divorce on, if that makes sense,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so that presents a whole different type of journey for somebody who is, um, a husband, and then his wife says, you know what, I want out. And so, yeah, and certainly it goes the other way around too. There are times where men file for divorce and want. But yeah, the statistics are certainly that women are more likely to file for.
yeah. And I'm not trying to point a finger to women because we don't know the circumstances. The man may be a dog, right?
You know
But
what? There may be a reason why women are more likely to file for divorce, and our
yeah,
sisters can weigh in if they want to. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Or that sort of thing. But that's just the reality. 70% roughly of divorces are filed by women.
yeah. That's crazy, man. That's crazy. So so I wanted to share that because I wanted to use that as a platform for us to spring upon. And I know as we were planning this interview, you had mentioned a couple of key points. I think it was 5 total. And I'm going to quickly share those and then we'll dive into each of those. But I think those key points was first one was to survey the damage, but count your blessings. The second key point was rediscover who you are. The third is rebuild your rhythm and purpose. The fourth is work on forgiveness. That one's probably a tough one right there.
Yeah.
And then finally, the fifth one is surround yourself with the right support. And I think that's a really good one too. So before we dive into those points, I wanted to just step back just a brief moment and wanted you to share a little bit about your experience going through the divorce. Because like I said, I've known you for a long time. I knew you. We've known each other since you were single. And
Yeah.
so, and then I knew when you got married and then I just recently found out that you got divorced and didn't even know that. But share a little bit about that experience for our listeners and viewers.
Yeah. So I have had a marriage that was 13 years. And prior to our marriage, we actually dated about 6 years prior to getting married. So this was not a fly by night relationship. It was a relationship of love. It was a relationship that was built um, and undergirded by a relationship with God. We actually met in the church one day on a Saturday. I never forget in March of 1996. I woke up in the morning and decided, you know what? I'd heard about the singles retreat at church and in Houston. I was in graduate school back at Texas A&M University, my alma mater, and it's about an hour and a half to 2 hour drive back to Houston. And the church that I had attended whenever I would be at home was having a singles retreat. And I was 25 years old and felt like, man, it's time to meet her, whoever her is. And so I got in my car, man, at, I don't know, 7:30 in the morning or so, made the trip to Houston for this 9:30 start time for the singles retreat, really with the mindset of, hey, maybe I'll meet, her, right? And I thought no better place to do that than church. And so I went, I saw her, and keyed in on her. And she was actually leading a session on agape love. Okay. She was leading the session. So I looked at her and I was like, I think I'm going to go to her session. Right. What the- and she was a great facilitator, learned a lot in that session. And also thought it'd be nice to get to know her. This was a Saturday. The next day was Sunday. And so we had exchanged numbers and we sat together at worship on that next day on Sunday and became fast friends and started to look at the fact that, hey, maybe this could be more than friends. And I will say, look, it was an added plus that we met in church, and so I knew I had somebody who was aligned with me spiritually, and that
Yeah.
was an important thing to me at that age, at 25, right?
Yeah.
Years old. And so, sat next to her in worship. We started communicating, started dating. It was a friendship that led kind of into dating. And fell in love and started to plan our lives together over years that came, right? And so we married when I was actually in graduate school in North Carolina. She came up and moved to North Carolina, got our own place, got a job, that sort of thing. We wanted to we were engaged at this time, right? But we felt like we needed to spend some time together in the same city before going through with it. We did that. We did premarital counseling with our minister in North Carolina and felt like, okay, we got a shot at this. And we did it, right? And things were going well. At a point, we decided to move back home to Houston after we got married. We decided to start our family back at home. So we left North Carolina, both moved back to Houston, where we're both from, and started our lives together. And within the context of that, as what happens, I think, in a lot of relationships, is that you encounter different things, different difficulties, different growing pains. We had two beautiful daughters um, who are now ages 20 and 18.
Wow.
One is in college and about to graduate. The other one is starting her freshman year next month, and we just lived our lives. At some point, though, people say this, and I never understood this until I experienced it. But they say you start to grow apart, or you start to grow differently, and think about things in different ways. And that was our reality. Is that at some point we started to think about life, about marriage, about partnership, about our futures in different ways. And we just could not seem to align. So we went to counseling um, and tried. We really did. And I attribute that to her and myself because we were both willing to do the work, right? To try to get this thing back on track because at this point now there are two kids involved. And so we tried, but no matter how much we tried, we just could not get on the same page. And, I mean, it was unfortunate for so many reasons. Um, and I have learned now it will be 10 years since this divorce coming up this November. So we're at 9, years and a lot of change. But I've learned some things. And as a God fearing man, I have felt like, look, you have a responsibility to take what you have learned and share it with other people, whether they be contemplating divorce, which we hope they don't. And me and my former wife are in agreement with that because on the other side of this, we have both said we have got to warn people and stop people from doing what we did. Okay. But in addition to that, I have really been focused on how do we help people, and in particular for myself. She's helping people on her own, women by large, and I'm helping men, you know, to figure out how to navigate this thing, this very, very painful thing called divorce. And so that's what brings us to our conversation today.
Yeah, that's good, man. I have I call it the Bethel's phases of marriage. And so the phases are, the first phase is bliss,
Yeah.
the second phase is reality,
Yes.
the third phase is pivot,
Uh-huh.
and the fourth phase is mature, and then
Yeah.
the fifth phase is bliss.
I love that.
Yeah.
How it gets back to bliss.
Yeah. And so
That,
but getting to bliss though is not an easy journey.
you know what? I appreciate that so much, Todd, because one of the things that I've said to people who are going through things is I always say, listen, you're going to have seasons, and that's what you're talking about. You're going to have seasons in your marriage, but if you don't give up, you can get back to bliss. But if you give up in the difficulty, then you've short circuited what could actually be a really good partnership going forward. In our case, unfortunately, we short circuited it before we could get to the really good part later on. And I think I really believe I can speak for her, and she'll likely watch this. I'm going to actually make sure that she does. And I think she would agree with me that we short circuited it before the season changed, right? I would say to people who are watching, if you're contemplating divorce, maybe thinking about waiting for the season to change because what you're in right now doesn't mean that that's where you have to be going forward, right? The season can change. And unfortunately, in our case, it was short circuited before we had a chance for the season to change. And both of us are aligned in the fact that maybe part of our mission as two God fearing people is to really encourage people to hang in there, right? Unless there's something that is just egregious,
Yeah.
where you're harming yourself by staying in, okay? Divorces should not be taken lightly at all. It should involve struggle and best efforts to keep it together. But I do want to acknowledge that there are people who are really suffering in a lot of ways in their marriages and feel like the only way they can save themselves is to move forward. And so there's no judgment there if that's
Yeah.
who you are.
Yeah.
But I feel like for the people that they need to give the best shot possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree there. So let's talk about the first key point that you mentioned. We mentioned earlier. That's about surveying the damage, but counting your blessings. So that's an interesting statement there. Yeah, what does that balance look like in practice for someone feeling kind of undergoing that whole, the hurt and pain, the suffering, but counting it as a blessing? What does
Yeah,
that mean? Yeah.
yeah. So here's what I mean by that. So I like to use analogy sometimes to help people understand my thoughts. And so when I say survey the damage and count your blessings, right? Survey the damage, but also count your blessings, is that I like to think of it in terms of a storm, okay? A storm, a hurricane, a wildfire, etc., right? And so when an event like that happens, what the person normally does, let's say they've had to flee their home, okay? And I've had to do that. I live in Houston, Texas, where we have hurricanes. And we had a hurricane back in 2017. I left the house. My family was safe, that sort of thing. And not expecting that we were going to flood or anything like that, but we did flood. They released water from a dam, and my entire subdivision flooded. And so
Wow.
when I got back home, my house was destroyed. Okay, at least the bottom floor of it was destroyed.
Wow.
I'd only been living in the house, built it from the ground up, had only been living there at that point for about 4 years. And so you can imagine, like 4 years in, we picked everything that went into this house, from the flooring to the paint colors to the accents to the upgrades. And then you walk in 4 years later and your bottom floor is totally destroyed. Well, what you do then is you start to survey the damage. What happened here? You know, what's destroyed? And then what do we need to do to build it back? Right. And
Yeah.
so I say survey the damage. When it relates to a divorce, there is damage. And so for anybody contemplating it, let me just say, there's going to be damage. What people are seeking in a divorce, Todd, is they are seeking relief because they feel like what they're going through, they can't take anymore.
Yeah.
And they're
That makes
seeking
sense.
some degree of relief. And I get that part, right? But what I want everybody to understand who sees this, who's contemplating it, right? And then we'll talk about the people who have done it and are healing from it. But if you're contemplating it, realize that the relief that you seek is going to be accompanied by some damage. And the first thing I think you have to do after you go through with it is survey the damage that has occurred, because there's going to be damage. There's going to be damage to you personally. There's going to be damage to finances. There's going to be damage if you have children, which most people seeking a divorce do have at least a child or two or three.
Yeah.
There's going to be damage if you're a God-fearing person and have a church family, people who are looking at you as an example. There's going to be damage to them. There's going to be damage to the relationship between you and your in-laws and that other side of the family who's looking at you some kind of way. There's going to be a lot of damage. There's going to be damage to your self-esteem. There's going to be damage to your reputation. All right. There's going to be damage. And you have to survey that and really take in what the damage is so that you can then begin the process of fixing the damage and rebuilding. You can't rebuild until you know what to rebuild.
True.
You can't know what to rebuild until you know what the damage is. Now, with that said, surveying the damage, I want you and your audience to think back to when we had the wildfires and when we've had hurricanes and when we've had tornadoes. And what do you see in that? You see people,
Devastation.
yeah, devastation, complete devastation. But when they get home and they survey the damage, what I've seen is that they go through the rubble and they find something that survived. It might be, I saw one case where after the wildfires in California, a man went home, whole house destroyed. But he went through the rubble and he found a framed picture of artwork that his young child had done, and it has survived the damage. And he cried at the fact that this picture that his young daughter had done that has survived the damage. And that stuck with me, right? That in
Yeah.
the midst of all the destruction, all the things that cost a lot of money, all the things that really, on the surface matter, that he found this momentum that meant a lot to him. And so something survived the damage, right? And so he looked at that as counting a blessing that he still had this piece of artwork that meant a lot to him that his little baby daughter had done that was framed and survived. Some people have pets that survive disaster. And it's like they get back home and their pet is still alive. And it's like my entire house and everything in it is destroyed, but my is still alive. So what I say to people is this: divorce is destructive in so many ways, but count the blessings that still exist. It might be your children are still there, right? After the divorce, though they are hurt and maybe even traumatized by what some adults decided to do, but they're still there and have a future ahead of them. It might be that you still have your career. It might be that you still have your friendships, right? It might still be that you have your church family. So I say, yes, survey the damage because you need to know what you need to do to move forward. And the only way you can move forward is to know what's damaged and start to rebuild what's damaged. But also count your blessings. And to me, the biggest blessing of all is that you still have your relationship with God Almighty. And yes, Malachi says that he hates divorce, and he does, because he is trying to prevent his children, who he loves, from doing something that is detrimental to them. So he hates divorce for that reason. But he loves the person that happened to get a divorce. And don't ever forget that, because the
Yeah.
shame, the embarrassment of it can make you feel like, man, is God still on my team? Yeah, he's still on your team. He hates divorce, but he loves you.
Yeah. That is so good, man. I mean, yeah, a lot of times I've never gone through a divorce, thank God. But I've had friends that have had divorces, and it was very devastating, just emotionally and even health wise. And so to be able to pick something out that you can hold on to, like you said, if you have a foundation in Christ, and that's what you hold on to. So I love what you shared there.
Yeah.
Um, the other point you had mentioned, point two, is that you know the process of rediscovering who you are, and I think that's a pretty powerful concept. So, what practical steps or reflections can help someone kind of reconnect with their true identity post divorce?
Yeah. Thank you for that. So there's a term, Todd, that I am using in my work with people who have gone through divorce and are healing from it and trying to plot their next step. And that is a term that's out there. I didn't create it, but I've connected with it in so many ways from my personal experience and just my knowledge of psychology as a psychology professor and that sort of thing. And it's called identity loss. Okay. Identity loss. And so what happens is this: in the marriage, you are a spouse, you are a parent of a nuclear family. Oftentimes, people look at married couples as an example, right? And if you're in the church, you're looked at as being godly, following godly principles, right? And so you have all of these facets to your identity that are positive things. And then what happens once you get divorced is you're no longer a spouse. You're no longer a member of a nuclear intact family. In a lot of cases, people don't necessarily look at you as an example because nobody wants the example.
Yeah.
Somebody who's divorced,
Yeah.
right? And so
And
you,
also, you lose your friends too. You
yeah,
lose some of your friend sets. Yeah.
especially friendships that were mutual friendships that were part of the marriage.
Yeah.
Your in-laws
Yeah. That's
are
true.
no longer on your team because they're on the team of the person that they are blood related to, which I totally get from both perspectives, mine and my former wife's, right? And so all of a sudden, everything that was part of your identity for the most part, right, is now shaken and is now different. And so you lose your identity. It's like, well, I was a leader in my household. I was part of a nuclear family. I was an example. I was, in my case, leading at church and teaching Bible class and occasionally in the pulpit. I was all of these things, and now that's gone. In part, and I have a wonderful church family that I served for over a decade, and it wasn't them that decided that I, didn't need to continue. It was that I needed to step back and minister to myself and my family. And so I took a step back from that. And so my identity, all of a sudden, this guy who was the go-to guy, the example, the leader, the nuclear family, the spouse, it was gone in an instant. And so then now it's like, wait a minute. The person that I've known myself to be all this time and that everybody else has known me to be is now totally different. That's been temporarily taken away. And so who am I now? And so when I talk about rediscover who you are, because you essentially have to step back and start over in a sense. You have to find out who you are now, post this traumatic event. And that, I think I can honestly say, of everything that I faced in divorce, that was probably the hardest thing to deal with, was redefining who I am. At my core, I'm still the same guy, right?
Yeah.
But in the public eye and in titles, for whatever that means, I'm different now. And so, how do I navigate that and deal with that? And so, yes, rediscovering who you are, no longer as a spouse in particular, no longer as a person in a nuclear mother, father, children family. How do you rediscover that person? And what I want to say is that it can be a positive thing to rediscover who you are. It's almost like you get a chance to take a blank piece of paper, right? All the years prior, things were written on that paper. But now you get to take a blank piece of paper and you get to write out who you're going to be now. And I found that piece of it, while painful, not going to sugarcoat this, while painful, it was also liberating to say, who is Carey going to be now? Let's plot this thing out. So for the audience, I would say, if you're going through this or have been through this and you're still working through it, rediscover who you are. Find new passions, find new hobbies, find new things to do. I took some trips solo by myself, right?
Yeah.
To rediscover who Carl is now, post who Carl had been, right, in the past.
That's good. I wanted to ask you this question. This is not this this is something I guess some people think about once they get when they're gone through divorce. What are your thoughts on establishing like another relationship or in general? So
But
I'm like, please, never again.
uh,
No.
right. Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, yeah, absolutely. I remember, speaking to that point, I travel and have traveled in my professional life. And I remember after my divorce, I was riding with a cab driver. And so, I'm a talker, as you can tell. And I asked, well, he asked me first, I believe, hey, you got any kids? That sort of thing. I was like, yeah, I got two daughters, two great daughters and that sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, you married? And I was like, well, actually, I'm divorced, got a divorce a couple of years ago and that sort of thing. And so he said, yeah, me too. I'm divorced too. And so then I said, so would you ever? And he stopped and said, no, man, never. And I couldn't even finish the sentence. Like, I'm not doing that again. And I could relate to that to some extent, right? In all honesty, I could relate to that because of the pain of it all
Yeah, yeah,
and the readjustment and the losses. Let me be clear. Divorce is a loss. Okay. You're losing the person you slept next to, who had your back and you had their back, and you've lost it. So it's a loss. So look, as it relates to getting beyond that and looking at what's next, I will be transparent and admit that I've been first of all, I'm cautious by nature. Okay. Just in general, I'm not a risk taker. I took a risk in getting married. Okay. When I was, and I think a lot of people have, a little bit of fear about it if they're really honest with themselves.
true. Yeah,
And I had that, but I took the risk and then it didn't work out. And so, of course, taking a second risk is going to be a hurdle that I have to overcome. I will say the piece of advice I will give as it relates to your question is this. Shortly after my divorce, I did start dating again. Okay. And as I look back at it now, that probably was not the right thing to do a few months after the divorce. Okay. Because what I didn't understand, and I don't blame myself for this because I just didn't know. I thought you get divorced and then the next natural thing is start dating again. That's what I mean. I didn't know. I'd never been divorced before. But as I look back on that situation, and I dated a very great, wonderful woman, okay? But it wasn't fair to her, right? For me to be coming out of something so traumatic and then a few months later bringing her into that. I didn't know any better, you know? And so now what I would say to people is have patience with your process. Um, Take time for yourself. Yes, you're going to desire companionship in part because you need somebody to kind of vent to kind of help you work through what you've been through. But that really isn't fair to them. So I would just say take some time, bite the bullet, be by yourself for a while until you have more healing so that you don't bring that into the next situation. Right.
yeah, yeah. That's good, man. And that leads to the next point about, I guess, rebuilding your rhythm and purpose after the divorce, because I think a lot of times I sense that you're so engulfed in the pain and the change and the turmoil of the divorce that you kind of really get out of rhythm, and and a lot of times you lose purpose, right? You're kind of just in the survival mode. So how do you do that? How do you get back on track and pursue the purpose that God's kind of giving you to continue to do, even with the challenge of divorce? How do you get back on track? What are some of the things that you would suggest?
That's a great question. And I would just say that first and foremost, um, there is power in stepping back, okay, for a moment. Step back. If you need to get off the grid for a while, do what you need to do, okay, to process and to get ready for rebuilding the rhythm and the purpose. All right. Sometimes you need to step back. In my case, I had taught Bible class, and occasionally preached in the pulpit for over a decade. Okay. When that divorce happened, I myself needed to take a step back and check on myself and my children, right? And other people who were affected by the divorce. And so I took a step back. That's what I needed to do for me. Okay. Everybody's journey is different. I will say divorce is grief, and we need to put that name on it. Okay. I didn't get it initially that I was grieving until a very close friend of mine said, "You're grieving." And I thought, grieving? Now I think look, I teach psychology. But when we talk about grieving, usually it's about the loss of a loved one. Okay. And when my very close friend said to me, "Man, you're grieving." And I was like, "I'm grieving." Okay. So I needed to take a step back and check on Carl before Carl could minister to anybody else. He needed to minister to himself. It needed to be ministered to. It needed to minister to his children. Okay. So I took that step back. So when I say rebuild the rhythm and purpose, I don't want to negate the importance of taking some time for self. That's really important. But after you've taken some time for self, I don't think you should wallow there, because wallowing, what it can do is it can extend beyond a period of time that is healthy. All right. And so, what I believe is after you take a step back and after you check on yourself, that you should then re engage in life. Re-engage. It may be re-engaging in a different sort of way than your life was when you were married. Re-engaging might mean, hey, I'm getting back into the church house again. Maybe I'm not ready to be at the congregation that I was at with my family because everybody is wondering where your family is, right?
Yeah.
And there are memories that are there where all of you worship together. And so if you can, great. But if you're like, oh, it's just too much there. You know, people who after they lose a loved one sometimes move the house that they live in, right? Because it's too many memories.
Yeah.
So they have to
Yeah.
go somewhere else. And so look, if you can't handle it at the congregation that you were at before, reconnect with your church um, upbringing and center, right? That's in your heart, and get back to church. Um, Beyond that, do fun things, travel, be your best at work, get in a rhythm, get back in a rhythm. Because if you stay out of the rhythm too long, it makes it harder to get back into the rhythm, right? So
Yeah.
take time for yourself, but get back into rhythm. And then beyond that, and this is thankfully where my journey has led me, which is then get back into purpose, right? That yes, you've dealt with something traumatic, but beyond dealing with something traumatic, you still have a whole lot to offer. And so get into that purpose and live that purpose. And that's what I'm doing now. That's what I'm doing in terms of what we will talk about shortly, which is, my purpose in trying to help others who are going through what I've been through. And I've already helped several men in particular who have struggled with this. And so now God has given me a purpose through my pain, right? That I intend to fulfill to its highest degree. And I'm excited about that. And I'm excited that God is willing and able to use me to do that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, get back in the flow, man. Get your purpose. Take the time you need for yourself, but get back in the game. It's too much work to do. Get back in the game.
I love that, man. I really love that. That's really good. Just to be able to get back into moving, get back into doing, and get back into fulfilling, right? So I love what you said there. So this next point is, I think it's going to be a tough one. And that is forgiveness.
Yeah, yeah,
And forgiveness can be really tough, especially when you're tied with emotions and your emotions are raw. I mean, how do you guide someone through that step without rushing the process, right? Because a lot of times you can't really, well, in midst of dealing with an emotional situation, it's hard to manage that. So, and especially when it comes from a place of hurt, or a place where you felt like you were slighted, or a place where someone slighted you. And so, how do you how do you work through that?
yeah. So, let me say first and foremost, and I so appreciate this conversation and the way that it's going, how authentic it is, and I am, honoring your approach and honoring the authenticity of this conversation. First and foremost, we're human, okay? And forgiveness is not easy, right? When you've
Not
been
at all.
really bad, it's just not easy. So I don't want anybody to take from this conversation that I'm just saying, oh, yeah, forgive and it's going to be easy and that's just what you got to do. It's not easy, but it's possible. I've reached it by the grace of God and only by his grace. Um, what I would say is that there is a period of time where there is anger, and maybe even anger as you have never felt it before in your lifetime. Because not only are you hurt and disappointed, but your children, innocent children who did not ask to be here, are hurt too. And when somebody hurts your children, I don't even have to say how hard that is, right? To digest and to deal with. So I'm not here to say forgiveness was an easy road for me, because it was not. All right. However, what I will say is this, is that I got there. By the grace of God, I got there. And one of the key components for us, I'm talking about me and my former wife, who I will give credit to in terms of our road to forgiveness. We did counseling during the marriage when things got rocky, really during the last 2 years of the marriage. We did counseling individually as we were going through the divorce to make sure that this was something that was warranted. And after the divorce, when we saw the impact on our children, we went back to counseling as a,
Wow.
yes, post divorce,
Wow.
right?
I never heard of that.
Yes, sir. Isn't that something? And I give her credit for being willing to do that. But we could see that the anger, which is a natural human emotion when you are hurt by somebody, we could see that the anger was having an impact on the two people we love the most outside of God Almighty. And so the two of us said, hey, we've got to go and do some work so that we can raise these girls who at the time were 8 and 10, who had they had no role in what was happening with their parents, and who deserved better, okay? Who deserved better. And so what I can say about us is that our love for our daughters made us go back to counseling, the two of us, to unpack what happened that led to that divorce so that we could get to the point of understanding. That's first, understanding. Because you really, I don't know. Now, people say they've forgiven. I've seen some cases online where somebody's kid is murdered and they forgive the murderer. online, and God bless them. God bless them for that, right? I needed more. I needed more. Okay. I needed some answers.
Yeah.
Answers as to what led to this so that I could understand more, which then could lead to forgiveness. So if your viewers don't hear anything else I say, we did something very powerful, Todd, called,
Definitely.
yeah, it was called Family of Origin Counseling. And in Family of Origin Counseling, what you do is you go back to your childhood and you look at the significant events that have happened in your childhood and how those events help shape you, watch this, and help define you as a person and how you show up in your romantic relationships, right? So
Yeah.
something that happens to you when you were 6 or 10 becomes part of your being. And then when you show up in a romantic relationship, you're not thinking about what happened at 6 or 10, but inevitably that part of you that still resides within you shows up in some way in your romantic relationship. And then your partner is dealing with that part of you, right?
That's
And they
deep.
don't even know it. And so what's happening is that they're stepping on landmines in their relationship with you that they don't even know are landmines because it was before you met them. And so once she and I did that and found out what the hot buttons were, the landmines were that we were bringing into our marriage that we didn't even know about, then we were able to see why the other person reacted the way that they did. I'm going to give you a quick example. Okay. This is not specific to my marriage, but let's say that as a 8-year-old, you're playing outside and you're attacked by a pit bull at 8. And so you get over the attack, but you're like traumatized in that attack. And so it's 8 years old, and then you get married at 25. And your wife comes home and says, "Babe, I got a gift for you." And you're like, "What you got for me?" "A new puppy. Here's your new pit bull." And you're going, "What in the world are you doing? Why in the heck would you bring this dog, this vicious dog, into this house? And what were you thinking?" And you go off. And she's going, "Wait a minute, it's a puppy." Well, she doesn't know that you were traumatized at 8 years old by a pit bull.
Yeah.
See what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it causes all kinds of problems in the marriage. She's thinking you're ungrateful and and you're overreacting and all, and you're like, "Wait, this was a trauma for me." And so what happens is then when you find out these things from their origin that make them who they are, then you're able to get it and say, "Wait a minute. Okay, I wasn't meaning to step on that landmine.
Yeah.
It didn't hurt you." And it brings the temperature down in terms of the anger. And
Yeah.
that's what happened with me and my former wife. We were able to bring the temperature down and raise our children in relative peace. I'm not gonna say it was 100% because but we were able to
Yeah.
raise them in relative peace and give them the childhood or most of the childhood that they deserved, with the exception of us being under the same roof. And so that's where forgiveness became. So I would say understand it, right? And the last point I'll make on that is that, and they say this all the time, forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. Because you're sitting there angry and mad all the time and stewing in it, it's hurting you. You're the one that's not able to sleep well while they are fine. So get rid of the anger and work towards forgiveness for yourself, right? And yes, it is a good thing for them and for the children if there are children involved, but do it for yourself.
Yeah, that is so good. I think I think I would say probably 99% of everyone that gets married really doesn't have a clue about what marriage really involves. We say the vowels, but I don't think we truly fully comprehend what the vowels really mean. And also too, like you said about the origin, I guess what was it? The
Origin of
origin?
family of origin
Or
counts.
yeah, that
If
I
you
mean that when you
write it down, family of origin.
I need to write that down quickly.
Probably the most impactful thing that I've ever done. But yes,
Yeah, I need to do that. Because I think, when when we first start courting somebody, it's, typically it's kind of superficial in a lot of ways. I mean, of course you're attracted to that person, right? And then you may have similar interests, and you may like doing the same things, and you may have a good, your culture may be similar, but all those are really just very surface level indicators, right? You never, yeah, when I was courting my wife, I never sat down and said, what triggers you?
yeah,
I never got to that point of, now sometimes, you may see things early on, um, to be able to catch them, but typically you don't, or you see them and you say, well, I can change that when we get married, right? So
yes.
I appreciate you really sharing that, because I think, anyone that's watching this and that's getting ready to get married, and I'm not trying to discourage them from getting married, but I'm saying you really need to be prayerful and dig a little bit deeper than the attraction, and you like to do things together, because it's way more than that.
100%, 100%, 100%. And you know, look, at the end of the day, as it relates to that point of forgiveness, is that we're all human beings and
Yeah,
we're all flawed. And I will tell you, one of the counselors that we saw, who did the family of origin counseling, she said, I tell people all the time, if you can't forgive, don't get married, because inevitably this person inadvertently or carelessly or whatever it is going to do something that hurts your feelings or that hurts you, right? And so if you can't
definitely.
forgive, then just don't get married, because they're a human being. They're flawed, they're gonna make mistakes. Just don't get married if you are not a person that can look at what they've done and forgive them for being human, fallible, imperfect, flawed, right? And the Bible tells us that all of us have sinned in one way or another. And the sin might be something that's minor, it doesn't have to be something really deep, but you're dealing with a sinner. And so to expect that that sinner is never going to hurt your feelings or do something that's not in line with what you expect from them is just setting yourself up for a big disappointment and potentially a disaster and potentially a divorce. And so
Yeah.
just, realize that you're bearing another human being and be ready to forgive. And if that's not your thing, honestly, you'd probably be better off just not doing it, because there's going to be a time in a lifetime relationship, there's going to be at least one time you got to forgive them. At least one.
and I,
And
and
I'm being generous here.
yeah, and that's even beyond marriage, right? I mean, your best friend,
Best friend.
or your work coworker or whatever, right? So
Absolutely. 100%.
in my case, I get on my wife's nerves pretty much daily. So
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I appreciate that. Yeah. And then last thing I'll say on forgiveness before we move, Todd, and this is very important, is to forgive yourself. Because what happens is sometimes it could be something that you did that you say, I wish I hadn't done that. Maybe I could have done that differently. But beyond that, one of the things that some people struggle with is marriage is optional. It's optional. Nobody It's optional. Nobody says you have to get married. And so if you take that risk and get married and then it doesn't work out, sometimes you then have to look at yourself and say, what was I thinking? Why did I do that optional thing that has now dismantled my life? Why did I do that optional thing? You know, I was all right. Why did I do that? And you can start to be angry with yourself for taking the chance. Okay. Approximately 1 in 2 marriages don't make it till death do us part. So you can look at yourself and say, why in the heck would I take that kind of chance on something that's optional? And I now happen to be the one of the two that didn't make it. A therapist told me I did some individual therapy and I was having a rough time of it. Year 3 after the divorce, still having a rough time. Went to therapy again. And I'm just like, can't believe this has happened. It's 3 years prior. Can't believe this has happened. What am I going to do? This therapist looked at me straight, a male therapist, and said, Carl, it was going to be me or it was going to be you. That's how common divorce is. It was going to be me or it was going to be you. Okay.
Wow.
So stop acting like Armageddon has happened. Divorce is common. It was going to be me or it was going to be you. It happened to be you. And so that's where it is. And, but I still felt like, well, yeah, but it wasn't supposed to be me. And so forgiving oneself and saying, look, you took a chance. It was an option. You still took the chance on love. It didn't work out. Forgive yourself for taking the chance. Forgive yourself for taking the chance. And so for me, transparency, I will be extremely cautious in marrying again. Doesn't mean I won't. Okay. I hope I do. But I will be extremely cautious in marrying again. I'll do all the work that I could possibly do in advance before taking that risk again. Okay. But for some couples, yourself, others, it's worth it. And I hope that if I do it again, that it will be worth it. But I'm sure gonna do the work on the front end to make sure myself the best chance possible, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, well, even being married to my wife for 34, 35 years, it's been a journey. I thank God, that we're thriving right now. We weren't always thriving,
Yeah.
and it was really our dedication to saying that divorce is not an option, and we were to trust God in the good and in the bad, and that's what kept us really, because there were times when we were like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
I think maybe we think things, but when he said, no, divorce is not an option, we just trust God in this and keep moving and doing our best. So,
Man, congratulations. And to your point, man, I think I'm gonna have an agreement sign that says divorce is not an option. Sign here. And if
yeah.
you can't sign, it's not
But
even.
but to your point, it takes two, right? It takes two. So I mean, I mean, even if your heart's desire to do that, if your spouse is not there, then it's nothing you can do. I mean, we're not
Listen,
robots. So
somebody said this to me, and it was wisdom. They said, "Look, it takes 2 people to get married. It takes one to get a divorce,
so
right?
true.
It takes one person to decide they want out.
Yep,
That's it. Okay."
that is
And
so true.
so, and another person who I have so much respect and love for said, before I got married, they said, marriage is easy to get into and hard to get out of. And I thought, I didn't understand it. I'd never been married before. This person had been married before and was just trying to say, it's easy to get into, it's hard to get out of. And when I sit here today, I can tell you that divorce was the most challenging life experience that I have ever had. And I have lost my father, right, at 14 years old. And divorce trumped losing my dad at 14 years old. And so that leads me to, and I know we're going into the last segment, which is um, my work now, because I realize how difficult it is to help other people who are going through it and who are on the other side of divorce and who are struggling with rebuilding their life post divorce. That's what God has given me and put on my heart at this point in my life. Is that, Carl, I'll take what you went through and I'll do something positive with it that will help other people. And hopefully we can help other people avoid divorce, but for those who find themselves in that state, um, my mission is to help make this process easier, to help make the transition more healthy and not destructive to the person who's going through it, right? And to hopefully maybe even speed the process up a little bit. It takes time, but hopefully speed that up. My sister sent me an article when I was in year 3, still struggling. And the article said it takes most men 5 years to recover from divorce. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in year 3. I can't do 2 more years of this, right? And sure enough, Todd, it wasn't until 5.5 years plus, in fact, July of 2021, that I woke up one morning and I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I know that's a cliche, but literally I've been dealing with a weight on my shoulders for 5.5 years. And one day I woke up and didn't feel it. I thought it was a fluke. Really, I thought, okay, it'll be back tomorrow. And it was gone. And it was gone 2 weeks from then and a month from then. And it's still gone today. And so to God be the glory that I'm on the other side. And my mission now is to help other people as they try to transition to the other side of something that is a very, very difficult life experience.
Yeah, I want to. I know this last point was surrounding yourself with the right support
Yeah.
for transformation. But share about your this next phase of your life, and you mentioned some of it already. But share to our audience how you're going to be able to help others, kind of dealing with divorce and other things.
Yeah. So listen, for years, as I mentioned before, I was active in the church, teaching Bible class, occasionally in the pulpit, and just helping others. Also, in my professional life outside of church, I'm a college professor dealing with college students who come with a myriad of young adult concerns and helping them through their things and that sort of thing. And so I've always been somebody that's wanted to help other people. And so now at this stage, in my life, having been through what I went through, and now being clearly on the other side and having had my breakthrough and healed and all of that sort of thing and happy. And that's one of the things I want to make sure that people understand is that there is life after divorce, and not just life, but a doggone good life after. Okay. I'm experiencing it, but there's work that has to be done to get there. And that is my mission now, which is to take some people who are going through this and to help guide and help them navigate their own process, not to give advice because the answers are within. God has given us our own answers, but sometimes we need somebody to prompt us to help us get to those answers. And that's what life coaching does. Life coaching, or more specifically, in this particular case, divorce coaching, but I do life coaching for a number of different um, situations and pains and transitions that people are going through. But that's my thing now, is just how can I help? I want to help. I don't want cost to be a barrier. And so, regardless of whether or not a person feels financially able to commit to coaching, I still want them to reach out to me, because I'm not doing this as a business. I'm doing this as a ministry slash service. Now, I want to help some people, right? And so that's where I am in my life right now. And I'm just grateful to God that He's put it in my spirit that I can still be used despite what I've experienced. And you look at the Bible, He is taking people who've experienced, tough things in their life, right? And
Yeah.
He's used them His glory. And so I pray and I ask Him, Lord, use me to your glory. Use my unfortunate situation and circumstance to help other people navigate theirs and to be better and to do better. And so very quickly, I'll just say, look, number one, if you're trying to get to the other side of this and get the right support, start with confidants, start with your church family, start with your minister, start with people who really love you, family members, friends, confidants, etc. And then there is a real need, I believe, if the pain is really difficult and you feel like you're getting stuck and need some help, for counseling with a therapist. Now, I teach psychology and have for many years. So I believe in therapy. I've done therapy myself, as I've mentioned several times, okay, through my process. And so that's important. The work that I do, so therapy looks at trauma, past hurts, how to process that, and beginning at how to look forward, right? Life coaching deals with let's take what happened and let's make some plans for the future and let's execute those plans and let's have some accountability around those plans and getting coaching, maybe it's on a weekly basis, right, for a period of time to help you make progress in meaningful ways, quantifiable ways with somebody who is kind of holding you accountable for making the progress that you need to make. And that's the work that I'm doing. I'm willing to do that work with both women and men who've experienced divorce, but I will say that my niche, my calling, right? Because of what I experienced is to deal specifically, with men who are having a hard time. Because as men, we don't do as good of a job as women do in talking things
Yeah,
through.
communicating.
Yeah, that God has placed on my heart that, hey, Carl, you got to help the brothers in Christ out. Okay. And so I'll talk to anybody, but I do believe that my calling, my niche, is to help the men who have been through this experience.
So how can they find out more about what you do, your contact information, all that good stuff?
You know what? Listen, I'm gonna give you two. I'm gonna give you two. I'm gonna give you three ways. All right. So I can be emailed at drcarey.lifecoach.com. Dr. DrCarey lifecoach.com. Okay. DrCarey lifecoach.com. I can be texted at 832-910-4188. 832 910-4188. Again, 832-910-4188. And then my website is Dr. C, DRC at life, DRC Life Coach .com. drclifecoach.com. So you can go to my website, you can text me, you can email me, okay? And I'm willing to talk with you, okay? This is not about, business. This is about ministry and service, okay? And so I'm willing to help and willing to share and willing to work with anybody that I can potentially help in that regard.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, man. I mean, we just kind of touched like the tip of the iceberg on divorce. There's so many different other factors, so many other elements, and I think we could probably be on here for another 5 hours if we had to touch all the different elements of. But I thank you for your wisdom and sharing about your experience and being vulnerable and sharing about, your experience through divorce letting us and letting the viewers know that there's hope even in the midst of, a challenge like such as a divorce.
Absolutely. There's
So yeah,
there,
there's hope.
and there's also a very good life on the other side if you're willing to do the work.
Yeah.
Okay? If
Yeah.
you're willing to do the work, there's a very good life on the other side. And by the grace of God, I'm experiencing that good life. And I attribute it all to God Almighty. All
Amen to
right.
that.
Yeah, because there was a time I didn't see it. And for people who are watching, they may not see it today, but I want you to know there's a good life on the other side of this. All right. Look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome, man. Well, like I said before, thank you so much, Dr. C, for taking time out here on God Dreamers. And for you guys, let me know if you have any other topics that you'd like us to cover. If you like what we're doing, please like it and subscribe, and also share with your friends and family, because let's get the word out there. What we're doing here, because ultimately what we're trying to do is inspire each and every one of you guys to live the fullest life that you can through the purpose that God has given you. So that's our goal here, is to inspire you to fulfill God-given purpose, even in the midst of challenges in life. So anyway, so until next time, just want to say thanks again. God bless you. Thanks again, Dr. C, for being on here, and we'll see you guys the next time. Take care.
Thank you, Todd, and congratulations to your great work.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.